start by focusing on deeds, but it starts with where your devotion lies. And we've been reading the biblical truth of this from the historical records of Scripture found in the New Testament book of Acts chapter 2, verse 42, that tells us about the early church. It said, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added daily to their number those who were being saved. What may God do through the lives of those experiencing the salvation of God because we as the church focused on deepening our devotion? Florence Nightingale was added to the church number and became the founder of modern nursing. Martin Luther King Jr. was added to the church and became one of the most influential activists of the civil rights movement and a fighter against systematic oppression through nonviolence. It's upon the foundation of our devotion that our lives make a difference. So each week we've been looking at some specific things the early church devoted themselves to and how we can follow their example. And one of the significant verses in Acts chapter 2 is verse 44 that says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Now, the early church here was devoted to reconciliation, where there may have once been divides of culture and socioeconomic backgrounds. This was part of the church community's testimony of the kingdom in contrast to popular culture. And Bible scholar and theologian Dan Steele comments in relation to the early church in the book of Acts, stating that the early Christians defied cultural norms. They were a diverse group of people not conforming to the ways of the world. The church was being built not on social agenda, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we intentionally deepen our devotion. We need to embrace on that journey the ongoing navigation of unity as God's people together. A unity that transcends the divides and prejudices that we all have by the very nature of who we are as humans. And I can be the first to put up my hand and say, I discovered this about myself. It was about 2 years ago. We did our first ever Zoom interview around prejudice and racism. And I was interviewing someone that specialized in the field. And in the midst of the live online service, I began to recognize how privilege had protected me from seeing the pain caused to others through the very way in which our social systems had been built to favor me. And how I actually had a role to play in reconciliation because I had power through privilege. There was responsibility. So, we're going to continue this conversation. We aren't going to stop having these hard, courageous conversations. During the Black Lives Matter movement, every church on the face of the planet was suddenly trending with their conversations around prejudice and racism. In fact, I got criticized by someone that shared a link telling me about all the skinny-jeaned, trending, tattooed pastors talking about racism just because we were in the Black Lives Matter. We recognized that if we were serious about this, we weren't just going to trend with what everyone else was doing, but we had started an ongoing conversation in which we're going to continue to grow and learn and become the community of people that are devoted to one another beyond the dividing lines of prejudice and difference. And so we're going to do that today with the help of someone very important and very special to us. A guest who's going to come up and join me for an interview. He's a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University and president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He did a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of the Western Cape and his teaching credentials at UNISA, then a master's degree at Cornell University and a PhD at Stanford University. He was a high school biology teacher in Vredenburg in District 6, and since then he has been university teaching leadership around South Africa. He also leads a major project on behalf of the Ministry of Higher Education that prepares promising young academics from the 26 public universities for the professorate. His research is broadly concerned with the politics of knowledge as laid out in his award-winning book, Knowledge in the Blood. In 2013, he was awarded the Lifetime Achiever Award for Africa at the Education Africa Global Awards in New York and the University of California's Spend Love Award for his contribution to tolerance, democracy, and human rights. In 2014, he won the Naif El Rodda Prize from the British Academy for the Social Sciences and Humanities for his book, Knowledge in the Blood. He was a fellow at the Center of Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University from 2016 to 2017. He currently serves as the president of both the South African Institute of Race Relations and the South African Academy of Science. He also holds honorary doctorates from the universities of Edinburgh, Vermont, and Cleveland State University. So please, can we put our hands together for Professor Jonathan Jansen. So good to be with you, Professor.
Can I just correct a few things?
Yes, but please put it close.
Yeah, first of all, it says distinguished professor, but the letter of appointment at Stellenbosch at Barties was written obviously by a Tannie in Afrikaans in HR, and the letter says I am an extinguished professor. You know? The second thing I just want to say is thank you very much for your kind introduction, but it actually, you know, when I hear those good things, then I think of my late mother from Retreat, from Montague actually, but we grew up there. And she would say, "Dis alles net die genade. It's just grace." Actually, you're nothing. You are nothing. Not you, me. I'm nothing. It is all grace. Thank you.
Sure. Professor, I think that's one of the reasons you are who you are. Because although you carry those things, the integrity of your character is more important than all your accolades. And so we want to talk today. We want to be courageous in conversations. I know we did a Zoom meeting with you 2 years ago, and that started opening this up. The church doesn't talk about racism a lot, or we kind of pedal around it. We want to be equipped and empowered to understand and reflect on ourselves in this area of prejudice. And I think today that's vital for each one of us to reflect on. As we talk, reflect on you. What is it that God is showing you through the conversation we have? And so I want to start right up front with a question. And it is that very often when we think of things like prejudice and racism, we usually default to black and white. And apparently it goes far deeper than that. Can you give us insight into this?
Sure. Again, sorry for just a quick detail. I just got in from Johannesburg on a flight in which I lost my laptop, I had COVID 2 weeks ago, my front tooth chipped, my hamster died. You know, so it's just been, my apologies for being a little bit.
That's okay.
Look, I think the most important thing is, well, let me just say, first of all, coming in here today, this is probably the closest, you know, I'm sort of an informal anthropologist, you know, so very informal. So I sort of pick up culture just by looking at things. This is probably the closest thing I've come to seeing a church in South Africa.
Wow.
I see a lot of formal, organized, you know, religious ceremony. But when I see joy, when I see the young people here singing, when I see the really successful attempts to bring our people together, I don't want to talk to you about racism. I want to go and talk at the Dutch Reformed Church down the road. I want to go and talk at my own church where I grew up in, Retreat in Steenberg. Wow. So I just want to acknowledge that I think you guys, the reason you're making progress is that you're determined to make progress. And that reflects, you know, God.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that. Sure. Look, our original sin wasn't racism. Our original sin was a difference. We struggle with difference.
Sure.
We struggle with people who believe differently, who want to fight. We struggle with people who love differently.
Yeah.
We struggle with women who are assertive. We struggle with, in the schools that I work in, black parents black African for the sake of this discussion, colored parents, telling me, we don't want this, we want white teachers.
Wow.
Okay, if we wanted black teachers or colored teachers, we'd go to Kailicha or Lavendale. So we struggle with this thing called difference, you know. We struggle with people from other African countries who look like us, you know. And so the fundamental prejudices that structure our society are there in our faces every single day. And you're quite right in the inference that it's not just race.
Yeah.
That's big, that's huge, because that was apartheid's major, you know, logic. But it's all the different ways. It's the way in which I, as a middle-class South African, look at the guy who's begging at the robot. That is also, you know, an attitude, etc. So recognizing all of these things together is a very important part of the question of what does it really mean to be human, and in the context of a church, what does it mean to be a Christian?
You know, when you say that, and that's why I wanted it to be the first question, because it sets the context for us to actually, as followers of Jesus, put up our ears and recognize this is a big deal. You speak about the fact that by our very human nature, we have prejudice. Of course, that spills into things like racism. But then what that tells us is that racism, prejudice, is not necessarily so much about a skin issue, it's a sin issue.
Indeed.
And as followers of Jesus, like with every other area of sin that seeks to master our hearts, we have to give focus to this thing of racism and prejudice and understand it's part of the human journey and our walk with Christ to work through this. And that's why this conversation is so important. So when it comes, and this is always fascinating to me, and this was a big struggle in the last conversation. This is where I had my revelation. But white privilege. Half of us here sitting middle working class white, you hear that, you're like, oh, no, that's... And I was like, white privilege. I'm like, I actually got angry. Don't accuse me. What have I done? I mean, it was my parents. I'm not racist. And I'm going, why are you blaming me? I've done nothing. So when it comes to white privilege, I'm tempted to say I wasn't privileged just because I'm white, so stop blaming me. Now, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, look, first of all, if you get to that point in your consciousness as a human being, as a Christian, you have made a huge journey around the moon, okay? I mean, that's progress. Most South Africans, the other part of the world I spent a lot of time in, most Americans, they get upset if you even mention white privilege, right? And yet the fact is that for 3.5 centuries, we've had this discussion, I think, before. If you just looked out here, there is a reason that there is an ocean view versus a Masipumalele versus a Sun Valley. Unless you're a total idiot and you cannot see how history has shaped different kinds of privileges, then of course, you know, but because a fish doesn't question the water it swims in. You know? So when you're in this familiar territory and you go to Bishops or Rondebosch Boys and you go to, you know, the clubs afterwards and you go to, you know, you can't understand that you're privileged because you're in this water. Okay? That makes it seem as if it is a natural thing. Okay? But everything around us is structured based on privilege, and therefore you are privileged. Now, here's a complexity. I am now privileged, right? So yes, I bear the scars of dispossession on both sides of the family, Jansen and Johnson, Montague and Lansdowne. And so those things are real in generational terms. But now I'm privileged. And now the big question is, do I realize it? And what do I do with it?
Sure. So we're sitting here now. There's some... I'm sorry I'm picking on white people. It's just because I'm white and I'm trying to figure this out. So if you're white, don't worry. Jesus loves you, I'm just saying. So I'm a middle working class white person sitting here now. I've never ever... My parents were good to people of color. I wasn't actively involved in racism. It was never my family. But in some way, you are speaking about the fact that it's a condition we live in more than something we've done personally. How do we, sitting here, develop a higher level of consciousness of our privilege that helps us begin to approach our prejudice differently?
Right. So first of all, let's make a really good distinction that you make. So Tiens de Toy is in trouble. Have you heard of a chap called Tiens de Toy?
No.
Okay, so Tiens de Toy is a student at my current university who decided to urinate on the belongings of a black man.
Yeah.
They're both first-year students. Now, the big question to ask, I don't find Tiens very interesting, from the point of view of this discussion, because Tiens is simply living out what he believes, how he was shaped, even though he was born after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, after democracy, which is what my book, Knowledge in the Blood, is about, is how do white kids who didn't live at that time behave as if they were there, right? So, but that's the easy part. It's easy to deal with Tiens because, he's out there with his racism. But most of us are not like that.
No.
Most of us don't go around urinating on other people's belongings. But the deep resentments, the deep anger, the stuff you say about when you close, let me tell you how easy it is to be a racist today. Becky Taylor comes on and says some half of your team here with tattoos won't be won't be selected to SAPS. Then Baleka Mbete says, so you're just watching with your family. Baleka Mbete says, well, the reason we're in trouble is we need a national cleansing ceremony to appease the ancestors. So she's failed to serve the living. Now she's appealing to the dead, right? So these are comical leaders.
Yeah.
And then Natin Tetwa says, well, you know what? We're in such trouble. I'm going to establish my own orchestra, for 30 million rands. This is just after he was slammed for the 20 million rand flag project. So you're watching this, and the news is on, and your kids are around you, and these are all black people.
Yeah.
And you say things.
Yeah.
When that taxi driver on Fishhook Main Road cuts in front of you,
I was bad.
You and your family, your kids are in the car.
My son was in the car, and I said, wind down your window. And sorry, church. I cornered him.
Yeah.
I looked at him like this.
Yeah. And what you're unlikely to do is to say, excuse me, sir, did your brakes fail? You're going to say things, right?
Yeah.
And so the stuff under pressure, it comes out.
Yeah.
Under pressure, it comes out. But it doesn't have to come out to recognize that we are wounded. We are deeply wounded. But how do you get there is your question. First of all, by having leaders like you open up the conversation. Yeah. I'm watching you very carefully there sitting in front. Yeah. And I'm saying to myself, I'll just tell you what's in my head as I watch you. I said, geez, he's got a tight jeans on. No, but that was a separate
my gosh.
No, that's a separate thing. You and your wife can sort that out, But I said to myself, this is a courageous brother. To open up this conversation with a group of white and black South Africans of all stripes in a church on a Sunday morning, my bro, you are less than 5% of pastors. Okay? And I want to thank you for that. So the beginning of knowledge. Yeah. How do I get to this point? By being courageous like you and saying, mense, ons gaan praat. We're going to talk about this stuff. It's going to hurt. It's uncomfortable. You would really just want to talk, later today, I'm going to buy a Bible again. Because I just realized that all those stories I was told in the Brethren Church, which is there we don't talk politics, where I want to look at the misinterpretation of the stories that Jesus told. Yeah. Like the story of the Good Samaritan. Yeah. That had nothing to do with the good guy. Yeah. That had everything to do with the race war. Wow. Jews, Samaritans. Why identify them? Sure. Okay? They hated each other.
Yeah.
And so the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of understanding is to have that discussion, first of all, in your church. But secondly, let me say to you as parents and future parents, have it in your home.
Wow.
And the best way to have it in your home is not with words.
Wow.
So I've got 2 children. They're both in their early 30s now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, one is with his family in New Zealand, and my daughter is here. And we didn't talk about racism a lot.
Yeah.
But when they came into their senses, when they woke up, they saw in our home then as babies, now as adults.
Wow.
They saw black people and white people.
Yes.
They saw gay people and straight people.
Yeah.
They saw Zimbabweans and South Africans. They saw people who spoke every conceivable language.
Yeah.
Okay? Even in my home, I mean, this is how far my generosity stretched. Even in my home as a Blue Bull, I had a Stormers fan. You know, I mean, that is stretching it a bit. Anyway, what I'm saying is, by the time they got to their senses, even though they are both devout Christians, more devout than I can ever be, they have a very firm understanding that one of the most fundamental principles of the Gospels is to love your neighbor as yourself.
That's
and
right.
by the way, to love your enemy.
Yeah.
You know how difficult that is? You know how difficult it is to love a Welshman after yesterday's game? By the time young people get to church, by the time they get to primary school, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
Because you learn your fundamental prejudices on your parents.
So, Professor, now I'm a parent freaking out hearing that.
Yeah.
Because I already have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, I think. Yeah. Oh, it's an Holy Spirit. And Janine. I'm now going, can you give me an example of a way that I can reflect a life in which we don't live with prejudice or subconscious?
As a parent.
As a parent now, literally an example. So you know, my youngest son, he hears these jokes at school where like they speak in an African like thingy, and then it's something about Zuma, you know, those Zuma went to, and they speak like black, and then they're like, and Zuma is a trolley, living in a trolley, or whatever. And they're joking because, you know, it's a funny joke. But actually they're criticizing black people. And then I'm like, I try not to punish him, but I try to deflect the way he's thinking about what he's doing. Can you give us an example of one practice?
No, sure. That's an easy one, actually. So I had a huge, because, you know, we lived in when our children were growing up, we lived in California, so we're now coming back to South Africa. And I was scared. I was really scared about, as a young parent, what are my children going to learn in South African schools and society? So that was a big deal for me. And we decided, my wife and I, that you can't protect them from that rubbish at school. You can't.
Yeah.
What you can do is to give them a sense of right and wrong. And the way to do that is not lectures.
Yeah.
The way to do that, as I said, is to make sure the environment in which they grow up in the home, right, is such that they understand that my father and my mother's best friends are not predictable by race, religion, culture, languages, and so on. So that when they went into the Durban schools in Westville, and stuff like that happened, and it did happen.
Yeah.
Okay? It had no effect on them.
Wow.
Except to regard these kids as disadvantaged.
Yeah.
You with me?
Yeah.
So they talk about that today.
Wow.
But there wasn't a module, a lecture on race.
Yeah.
There was a living out of what it means to love people, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, what language they speak, etc. You
know, I'm listening to you say that, and I'm going, my whole life I grew up in a safe, white, middle working class community. And I'm going like, for you as parents now, maybe, you know, you've raised your kids and you're in a very specific area, and it almost feels like, where do I cross the boundaries and create space where my children see me engage in relationships beyond what's familiar in terms of my privilege or where I come from? The church. Your children can watch that shift in your personal lives in a place like this, where we are from Massey, Ocean View, Sun Valley. We can do it here. This is a place where we can begin. Now, something I've picked up, Professor, maybe you can speak into this, it's not on this point, but then we'll jump here, is one of the things that I've noticed is we have clearly our three communities, Massey, Ocean View, and yes, we all have levels of privilege. It's interesting when you say it, you're slightly better living. And what I've picked up is a struggle between people in those different positions finding each other in engagement. And the most fascinating for me, and I've never actually said it, was watching, we're being courageous here, please, our colored people and white people interact. And one of the things that I picked up quite early on is I experienced what I thought was, and I can only say this intuitively, you've got the data, and so you can, but it felt like a lot of our colored community didn't want to engage with white people, and there was almost a sense of, like, the white person will speak to me in Shakespearean English. You know, I don't have your education. There's a level of, like, I hold back a little bit. I might make a fool of almost like a little bit of shame. I don't know if that's a reality in the psychology of communities.
I don't think it's that. I think it's more a caution about will I get.
It's a caution.
It's a caution about will I get hurt. It's a caution, will this person speak down to me? Because you see, in every aspect, long before you get to church, by the time you get to the spa, or the time you get to the railway station, and so on and so forth, you get clubbed.
Yeah.
When I went to Wynberg Girls the other day.
Yeah.
I'm to give you this real example.
Yeah.
I went into Wynberg Girls the other day, and the high school, to hand over one of my books to one of the teachers that I'm mentoring. But I dressed anonymously, which is fantastic. You know, so I got a dirty jeans on, a dirty shirt, a cap, and a mask. So now they don't know me, right? And I come into the front to the big reception area. There's about 5 women sitting there.
Yeah.
Colored and white. And I come in. Yes! Can we help you? And then I said something. I said, I'd like to see the principal. Please. Do you have an appointment? No. Then you can't see the principal. And I'm watching this, and I am laughing inside, you know. Because I knew if I dressed up as Professor Jansen with a tie and so on, oh, Professor, would you like some coffee? Would you know?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I can laugh at it
because
I don't feel inferior to anyone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't feel superior, but I certainly don't feel inferior to anyone. And I've been privileged to be able to have a voice.
Yeah.
Right? But imagine you go in there, and you, somebody from Manenberg or Khayelitsha, you have no voice. You just want your kid in a good school. Do you know how you feel when you leave there? You know? And by the way, the person who really crapped on me was not the white people. It was the colored woman sitting there. Right? So my point simply is that people are scared of getting hurt because they get hurt all the time. And therefore you want to be very careful about approach. I sometimes, and with all the privilege I have, I sometimes really, when I see white folk, Nuran Davids is a professor with me.
Yeah.
She has written a beautiful book. I hope you guys read it. It's called Out of Place.
Yeah.
Just released. And in this book, the opening line is, long ago I discovered that I had to decide how I want to be depending on where I am.
Wow.
And it's those calculations that people make that makes them go forward or hold back.
Yeah. So what can we do as a community to begin changing that fear? And when we know someone might be afraid of us, what can we do to begin creating an invitation of safety?
I think the most important thing is to cultivate genuine relationships. So if you look at integrated high schools,
Yeah.
Westerford, all of these fancy schools, yeah. I love these schools. One of the things that they don't do is cultivate genuine relationships. So the black and the white kids are friends all the way through matric. But once they get to adulthood and so on, they split again.
Yes.
You know, unless your surname is Budlender or one of those
Yes.
families that have always been integrated,
Yeah.
you then do so. So a lot of it is performance.
Okay.
You go to Herschel, everybody's together, but you separate
Okay.
once you become an adult.
Okay.
And you as parents are often the problem. So parents often say to me,
Yeah.
when I do parent workshops,
Yeah.
oh, but Professor, look at how lovely our children are playing together. I said that is true when they're in primary school. But when they hit puberty, white
Wow.
parents freak out. What if they love each other? Mullicate, you know? And so you're not
Wow.
conscious of that.
Yeah.
But the last thing you want is to marry a black person. I was thrown out of my
Yeah.
future father-in-law's home because,
Yeah.
as you can see, I'm dark. My wife is light. Even though we were classified the same way, he just threw me out, even though I was a preacher in his church, you know, a young preacher. So that prejudice runs deep, but the best way to do it is to cultivate you see, you can be friends in church and be total strangers when you leave,
Yeah.
right? How do you cultivate
Yeah.
genuine friendships?
Yeah. Powerful. Now, I hear a lot about white privilege, and we've spoken about it, and we'll continue because I want to look at roles. But in the past, I've got here a question. I hear a lot of white privilege, but I'm also aware that those who have been victims of white privilege in the past now sometimes display an entitlement issue, or there's an entitlement issue. One of our champions for justice has spoken about this. Can you explain that?
There's a beautiful book. Sorry, I'm a professor, so I always give books that you must read. A beautiful book called The Rage of the Privileged Class.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating book, and it's a book about black people who've been successful. This is obviously in the US context, but it's true here as well. And there is, and I've sat through enough braais and been in difficult conversations, where there is a resentment. You know, there is an anger, not among the working classes and the poor, but among the black middle classes, because
Wow.
they're furious,
Yeah.
okay? That despite everything that they do, they still get treated less. And that is something, obviously, that I talk about and that we have to address. So part of what I do is to say to people like that, listen, you're not powerless. You're not a victim anymore. What can you do with the authority that you have to bring our people together? Because
Yes.
I was there years ago, and it eats you up, and the only person that loses is you,
Yeah.
right? And so how do I turn this? But you see, the way this happens is not like in training.
Yeah.
The way this happens is through the day-to-day interaction. So when Mandela sits for 27 years with these guards, because they don't have a choice, they're in the same, these white guards on the Robben Island, they don't have a choice. He transforms them. This is very important, okay?
Yeah.
But they transform him.
Yes.
Because you can't be this close for so long
Yeah.
and not learn to love and respect.
Wow.
I was transformed by white kids at the University of
Wow.
Pretoria. That's what that book is about.
Wow.
Because I went in arrogant. I went in furious. I went
Yeah.
in with pain. I thought my job was to set them straight.
Wow.
And I went into their homes, their churches, their schools, and so on, their farms. And then, and I'm not scared to say this, I fell in love with them.
Yeah.
I wanted to serve them. I wanted to, and you can't be that close with an open heart
Wow.
and not be transformed by the people
Wow.
that you used to hate.
Wow.
It's just not possible.
So this isn't about us becoming good little Christians which deny our prejudice and make friends with people that are different. This is about who we're becoming. This is what the walk with Jesus is about. It's a transformational, lifelong journey. That's why I want us to continue these conversations throughout our life as a church and community, because that is interesting. It's about becoming. This is a first step for some of us in having these conversations. It's not ticking off and fixing a problem. It's a continual life of becoming. So we've looked at privilege, and we've looked a little bit now at the resentment of so many that have to process and still sit feeling victims. Now, obviously, each side of the spectrum, they carry a role in the process of reconciliation. What role does the person of privilege have, firstly, in reconciliation?
So I think the first role that you have is to, as I said, recognize your privilege and then put it to work in communities that don't expect you to show up. Okay? Give an example of this. In Gansbaai, there's a story in Die Burger about a kid, a white kid, whose mother is a cashier, single mother, at the spa there, Bianca de Koker. And one of my marketing people say, Professor, have you looked at this? There's a kid, middle-class kid from Berkeley High School. She didn't get into UCT medicine. She's angry because she got 7 distinctions, and she feels it's because she's white, right? I can give you about 20 examples like that. What I could do with my privilege, and what I would say, whatever your profession is, you could do, is to go and visit them. Is to offer them studies for free. Is to make sure that my generosity is not just based on people who look like me, but that it is broad. The result of those kinds of things meant that, now obviously 80%, 90% of the bursaries went to black kids who were struggling, including, by the way, some amazing graduates that I now have from Masiphumelele, etc. When you do things like that, because it's unexpected, going onto a rugby field, with Francois Pienaar's jersey is unexpected. It's going, if you do what people expect, then of course you're simply part of history. But if you go against what people expect, right? Like when I said to all my staff at the University of Pretoria, who were dead scared of me because I'm the dean. At the University of Pretoria, when you're a dean, you are regarded as a close relative of the Almighty, right? Which I am, by the way, but in another sense, And I realize this is a hyper-religious conservative community. How do I convince them that I'm not there to rule the roost, to be a boss? So I invited 5 random people. A white professor, Sunay Blichner, the black gardener, a range of people. And I said, you come into my office one by one, and I'm going to get on my knees and wash your feet. I've never seen so much tears in my life. From all of them. And instantly, you've broken a barrier. A class barrier, a race barrier, a language barrier, etc. If you do things that are unexpected, you change this country.
Even for yourself.
And you change in the process. You change in the process.
So if we are pursuing reconciliation as someone of privilege, there has to be a conscious willingness to step outside of our comfort and do something no one would necessarily expect in giving of ourselves from our privilege, and also making ourselves vulnerable in... So it's not about the way you feel, it's about a decision you make.
It's a decision you make, and you will be messed up. And let me just say to you as a church, right? Because I can see the courage here. When you do that, prepare for criticism. When you do that, prepare for pushback. Because you are doing... When Jesus sits down with the prostitute, these Pharisees went berserk. He eateth and drinketh with sinners. What's wrong with this man? But this is the Son of God, right? So when you go against the grain, of course, that's going to watch his name. I knew in my heart of hearts, as somebody who grew up evangelical, that it was the right thing to do to forgive those 5 white boys at the University of the Free State. I knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I also knew they're going to come for you, right?
Yeah.
And so Julius shows up with his band of brothers, and literally 15 minutes into the conversation, he tells the crowd, go home. This is the right thing to do.
Wow.
But what I might not have told you is the farmer in Vryheid, I think, who called early in the morning to say to my secretary, Ilse Leroux, just tell the prof when Julius shows up, he was at that point the fire brand from the ANC Youth League. He said to him, this is a white man, I don't know him from Barso. He said, I gathered all my farm workers and my family in a shed because we heard Julius is coming to cause trouble. And we tell the professor that we prayed through the night for him, okay, for a good outcome. And what a blessed outcome it was. But the risk you have to take, the retaliation will be there, but the reconciliation is real.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting how much of the reconciliation is linked to the sovereign spiritual work of God,
Absolutely.
even in what you do.
Yep.
So what role would the victim have in this reconciling? Someone of privilege, stepping out, taking risk, doing something no one would expect, and using our generosity not just for those that are like us. What would the role of a victim in reconciliation be?
You know, this is the amazing thing about South Africa. This is why I've never thought of leaving this country. There is an amazing capacity for forgiveness. Listen, let me tell you something. If you were the Minister of Police and you took out my kids in Mamelodi, and you then years later, this is Andrian Vlok, and I met with him about this, by the way, and you years later show up in Mamelodi, and you ask the mothers if you can wash their feet as an act of contrition or forgiveness. I'm likely to chase you out of the house if you took my kid.
Wow.
Okay? But they sat there and said, we forgive you. The 5 workers at the Free State said to those kids in their own language, when they said, vergewe ons asseblief, they said, not in Sesotho, they said in Afrikaans, maar natuurlijk, julle is ons kinders.
Wow.
There is an enormous capacity in our people. And that is very different from other countries. To be able to forgive, to be able to say. You know, when that chap, I'm watching the January the 6th hearings at the moment, because I'm fascinated by it. And this white guy who was with this right-wing troopers, he goes to one of the policemen who was badly injured. And he says, I'm sorry, the guy says, I'm not ready to forgive you,
Wow.
And I understand that. You can't force forgiveness.
Yeah.
But I'm also saying in this culture of ours, because it's so steeped in different kinds of spiritual reality, we have the capacity for forgiveness. So the victim is not somebody I worry about, except in the sense of making sure that they heard and making sure that there's some form of payback. I don't mean money necessarily. Some form of recognition. And you will be amazed at the capacity to accept, to embrace, and to forgive.
Wow. So we've spoken about roles in reconciliation. And you have actually spoken about some practical ways in which we can fulfill our roles in the process. So let me ask you a personal question. You were talking earlier about navigating your own prejudice. What personal steps have you taken in dealing with your own prejudice?
Yeah, so the first thing, when I encountered this, and I've written about this, as you did, you have this moment, right? And for me, it was the moment when a white man from Pretoria West, which is the poor area of Pretoria, next to Atteridgeville, comes into my office, and I can see this is an ambachtsman. This is not a guy who's rich. And he comes with his daughter, and she's, dressed up well. You can see she's prepared, and the hair is back. And he says, Professor, and he comes at night because he doesn't want to be seen asking me for money as a dean. And he comes in and he says to me, Professor, can you make a plan for my daughter? She wants to study teaching, but we don't have a cent. First thing I noticed, I shouldn't speak, but he had different colors for his shoelaces.
Yeah.
That's how, you know. And you know, in a moment, I didn't actually see a white man and his daughter. I saw my dad when I went to him in
Wow.
retreat and said, Dad, I'd like to study further.
Wow.
And my dad cried and he said, my boy, I don't have money for you to study.
Wow.
In that moment, he's not a white man, he's my dad. In that moment, she is not some white kid from, you know, Pretoria West. She is my daughter. She is, and when you have that experience, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
You can't go back again, right? So open
Yeah.
yourself up, as you mentioned a beautiful word earlier, vulnerability. Make yourself vulnerable, okay, to others, especially when you, one of the most, I need to mention this because you're a Christian church, okay? One of the most interesting things to me is anti-Muslim bigotry in the churches that I,
Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
among Christians that I hang out with.
Yeah.
You know, and they would say to they would say to me, Jonathan. Now, this is by the time that they know they can't speak
Yeah.
like this to me, but now it's 11 at night, and
Yeah.
you know,
Tired.
the coffee trek, you know. Jonathan, you must see all these Muslims coming into Rondebosch East. They no longer call it Rondebosch East. They call it the Middle East. You know, you know, and when the pain shoots through me, you know.
Yeah.
And I once had to ask my wife's aunt, she said, no, I went on my knees. She worked at Leith Roofing, and she said, I looked, and we were hiring a secretary. And I saw 3 Muslim women, and I closed the door, and I went on my knees, and I said, Lord, anybody but a Muslim.
Wow.
I said to her, you had the audacity to ask that of God?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And I asked her to leave our house. That was a
Wow.
big thing. I opened the door. I said, and by the way, that biryani you're eating was made by my Muslim friends, you know. It was made by Tahir Salih's family, you know. So the prejudice, as you said, is multifaceted. The anti-Muslim prejudice I don't get.
Yeah.
I don't understand
Yeah.
at all. But of course, I know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Devout Christian.
Yeah.
Devout Christians with this deep
Yeah.
religious. So those are different dimensions. And the best way to deal with that is to make sure that in your giving of yourself to others, that you make no distinction
Yeah.
between how the person prays
Yeah.
or what they look like, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's like, when your faith is grounded in the love of Jesus, there's a confidence that doesn't make you feel you ever need to
No.
defend
Absolutely.
or become threatened by others in terms of their own belief systems. It's the power of the love of Christ through us to all people. And that's interesting because we often don't think of prejudice in terms of our walk with Jesus. We think we're like being warriors for God against all the false gods, instead of letting God be God and grounding ourselves in that absolute truth and allowing Him to work through us. And that's very significant. So, where you've seen reconciliation in communities lived out and you've gone, this is how God intended it. Can you share a story of a community or group of people where you have seen genuine reconciliation? What did that look like and smell like and sound like?
Yeah, you know, I seldom see it in the church. I more often see it in communities. And let me just give you a very powerful example following on the previous one. My daughter's in disaster management, so she's got a degree in disaster management, so she wants to work in Parliament. That was a joke, and you can see you falling asleep, you know. And so she said, Dad, just come with me, you know. So at 5:30 in the morning, we're at the Grove, you know, school in Rondebosch. And I've never seen anything like this. There were black people, white people, there were Christians, there were Muslims, there were young people, older people, there was a whole lot of medical professionals, doctors, dentists, physiotherapists, and so on. They're all going to the Doorns because somebody experienced a child with dental pain, and where do you go? Except to Vista or someplace. So they're all going to go there for 2 days and set up a hospital and serve people. It's a big health sciences intervention. Suddenly a car stops, and out steps, not a Christian, but a Muslim from Pakistan, called Imtiaz Suleiman, of Gift of the Givers.
Sure.
And in this act of service to a largely colored South African community, he is doing more for reconciliation than a lot of us do by talking about it, you know?
Yeah.
But what struck me was how integrated that community was. Now imagine that was the church in action.
Yeah.
Okay? Just imagine that.
Yeah.
What a powerful testimony that would be.
Yeah.
So what drives me, you know, in all of the things I try to do, is something fundamental that I've never forgotten. And that is the reason I get upset when Christians don't understand this.
Yeah.
I think we don't understand the meaning of the cross of Christ. The meaning of the cross of Christ means all barriers are broken down.
Yeah.
There was a huge sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice made for us to be reconciled with God, but also with each other.
That's right.
And if we just understood that, we'd have a different ballgame.
You know, you say that, and it's so true, because on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came upon the 120 in the upper room, it says they began to speak in other tongues, and they all began declaring the praise of Christ in the native language of the people that were in that port at the time.
Right.
So what happened was the declaration of the good news and hope of Jesus extended beyond the boundaries of the small group of Jewish people in their context and culture. And every person heard the good news in the context of their world. You didn't have to become something to have access to the good news. And then we see the first time the Jews lay hands and the Holy Spirit is received by the Gentiles. And suddenly it's like we don't associate.
Powerful.
And that is the power of Jesus. Part of our testimony is in the ability to stand without needing to become defensive or fight for our belief in the midst of moments and with people where we might be tempted to. You don't need to defend the lion, just open the cage and love. It's powerful. Professor, we are landing. Any last words before we pray?
No, thank you very much for this honor. You might just be the reason that I go back to church, but first I want to figure out.
Go, Professor.
I just first I want to figure out, and I'll tell you why I no longer went, because at one stage I went to church about 18 or 19 times a week.
Wow.
I actually counted every service, every after service, every before service, you know. And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to try and live church as opposed to go to church, you know. But before you cite the book of Hebrews to me, and why it's important to be together in a church. Thank you for this opportunity. And let me just say to you, as a South African who tries in my little corner of the vineyard to make a difference, let me just say, as a South African with a Christian sort of commitment, I have no doubt that this is a church that is dealing with South African issues in an open and a courageous way. I also have no doubt. You didn't tell me this. I have no doubt you'll get pushback. But I thank God for you and for the church in, at the very least, sort of saying, let's talk.
Yeah.
Be blessed.
Thank you, Professor. Can we put our hands together for Professor Jansen?